and the Prisoner of Azkaban by J.K. Rowling. So they paid for their ice creams and crossed the street to the magical menagerie. There wasn't much room inside. Every inch of wall was hidden by cages. It was smelly and very noisy because of the occupants of these cages were all squeaking, squawking, jabbering, or hissing. The witch behind the counter was already advising a visit on the care of double-ended news. So Harry, Ron, and Hermione waited, examining their cages. A pair of enormous purple toads sat gulping wetly and feasting on dead blowflies. A gigantic tortoise with a jewel-encrusted shell was glittering near the window. Poisonous orange snails were oozing slowly up the side of the glass tank, and a fat white rabbit kept changing into a silk-top hat and back again with a loud popping noise. Then there were cats of every color, a noisy cage of ravens, a basket of funny custard-colored furballs that were humming loudly, and on the counter a vast cage of sleek black rats which were playing some sort of skipping game using their long bold tails. The double-ended gnu was at left, and Ron approached the counter. "It's my rat," he told the witch. "He's been a bit off color ever since I brought him back from Egypt." "Bake him on the counter," said the witch, pulling a pair of heavy black spectacles out of her pocket. Ron lifted Scabbers out of his inside pocket and placed him next to the cage of his fellow rats, who stopped their skipping trick and scuffled to the wire for a better look. Like nearly everything Ron owned, Scabbers the rat was second-hand. He had once belonged to Ron's brother Percy, and a bit battered. Next to the glossy rats in the cage, he looked especially woebegone. Said the witch, picking Scabbers up. "How old is that?" "Dunno," said Ron. "Quite old. He used to belong to my brother." "What powers does he have?" said the witch, examining Scabbers closely. Said Ron. The truth was that Scabbers had never shown the faintest trace of interesting powers. The witch's eyes moved from Scabbers' left ear to his front paw, which had a toe missing, and started loudly. "He's been through the mill, this one," she said. "He was like that when Percy gave him to me," said Ron defensively. "An ordinary common or garden rat like this can't be expected to live longer than 3 years or so," said the witch. "Now, if you were looking for something a bit more hard-wearing, you might like one of these." She indicated the black rats, who promptly started skipping again. Ron muttered, "Show-offs." "Well, if you don't want a replacement, you can try this red tonic," said the witch, reaching under the counter and bringing out a small red bottle. "Okay," said Ron. "How much?" "Ouch!" Ron buckled as something huge and orange came soaring from the top of the highest cage. It landed on his head and then propelled itself, spinning madly at Scabbers. "No, Crookshanks, no!" cried the witch, but Scabbers shot from between her hands like a bar of soap, landed spray-legged on the floor, and then scampered for the door. "Scabbers!" Ron shouted, hurrying out of the shop after him. Harry followed. It took them nearly 10 minutes to find Scabbers, who had taken refuge under the wastepaper bin outside Quality Quidditch Supplies. Ron stuffed the trembling rat back into his pocket and straightened up, massaging his head. "What was that?" "It was a very big rat of quite a small tiger," said Harry. "Where's Hermione?" "Probably getting her owl." Harry made their way back the crowded street to the magical menagerie. As they reached it, Hermione came out, but she wasn't carrying an owl. Her arms were clamped tightly around the enormous ginger cat. "You bought that monster?" said Ron, his mouth hanging open. "He's gorgeous, isn't he?" said Hermione, glowing. "That was a matter of opinion, thought Harry. The cat's ginger fur was thick, fluffy, but it was definitely a bit bow-legged, and his face looked grumpy and oddly scratched, as though it had run headlong into a brick wall. Now that Scabbers was out of sight, however, the cat was purring contentedly in Hermione's arms. "Hermione, that thing nearly scampled me," said Ron. "He didn't mean to." "Did you, Crookshanks?" said Hermione. "And what about Scabbers?" said Ron, pointing at the lump in his chest pocket. "That he needs rest and relaxation. How's he going to get it with the thing around?" "That reminds me you forgot your red tonic," said Hermione, slapping the small red bottle into Ron's hand. "And stop worrying. Crookshanks will be sleeping in my dormitory and Scabbers in yours." "What's the problem?" "Poor Crookshanks. That witch said he'd been in there for ages. No one wanted him." "I wonder why," said Ron sarcastically, as they set off towards the Leaky Cauldron. They found Mr. Weasley sitting in the bar, reading their daily prophet. "Harry," he said, smiling as he looked up. "How are you?" Fine, thanks, said Harry as he, Ron, and Hermione joined Mr. Weasley with all their shopping. Mr. Weasley put down his paper, and Harry saw the now familiar of Sirius Black staring up at him. They still haven't caught him, then? He asked. No, said Mr. Weasley, looking extremely grave. They pulled out all of our regular jobs at the ministry to try to find him, but no luck so far. Would we get a reward if we caught him? Asked Ron. It'd be good to get some more money. Don't be really ridiculous, Ron, said Mr. Weasley, who in closer inspection looked very straitened. Black is not going to be caught by a 13-year-old wizard. It's the Azkaban guards who'll get him back. You mark my words. That moment Mrs. Weasley entered the bar, laden with shopping and followed by the twins, Fred and George, who were about to start their 5th year at Hogwarts, the newly elected head boy Percy, and the Weasleys' youngest child and only girl, Ginny. Ginny, who had always been very taken with Harry, seemed even more heartily embarrassed than usual when he saw him. Perhaps because he had saved her life during their last term at Hogwarts, she went very red and muttered, "Hello," without looking at him. Percy, however, held out his hand solemnly, as though he and Harry had never met, and said, "Harry, how nice to see you." "Hello, Percy," said Harry, trying not to laugh. "I hope you're well," said Percy promptly, shaking hands. It was rather like being introduced to the mayor. "Very well, thanks." "Harry," said Fred, elbowing Percy out of the way and bowing deeply. "Simply splendid to see you, old boy." "Marvelous," said George, pushing Fred aside to seize Harry's hand in return. "Absolutely spiffing." Percy scowled. "That's enough now," said Mrs. Weasley. "Mom," said Fred, as though he'd only just spotted her and seized her hand too. "How really corking to see you." "I said that's enough," said Mrs. Weasley, depositing her shopping in an empty chair. "Hello, Harry dear. I suppose you've heard our exciting news." She pointed at the brand new silver badge on Percy's chest. "Second head boy in the family," she said, swelling with pride. "At last," Fred muttered under his breath. "I don't doubt that," said Mrs. Weasley, frowning suddenly. "I notice they haven't made you 2 prefects." "What do we want to be prefects for?" said George, looking revolted at the very idea. "I'd take all the fun out of life." Ginny giggled. "You want to set a better example to your sister," sniffed Mrs. Weasley. "Ginny's got all the buzzers to set an example, Mother," said Percy laughingly. "I'm going up for change for dinner." He disappeared, and George heaved a sigh. "We tried to shut him in a pyramid," he told Harry, "but Mom spotted us." Dinner that night was a very enjoyable affair. Tom didn't keep up with 3 tables together in the parlor, and the 7 Weasleys, Harry and Hermione, ate their way through 5 delicious courses. "How's we getting to King's Cross tomorrow, Dad?" asked Fred, as they tucked into a sumptuous chocolate pudding. "The ministry's providing a couple of cars," said Mr. Weasley. Everyone looked up to him. "Why?" said Percy curiously. "It's because of you, Percy," said George seriously, "and there will be little flags on the bonnets with HB on them." "For a harmonious big hat," said Fred. Everyone except Percy and Mrs. Weasley snorted into their pudding. "Why are the ministry providing cars, Father?" Percy asked again in a dignified voice. "Well, as we haven't got one anymore," said Mr. Weasley, "and as I work there, they're doing me a favor." His voice was casual, but Harry couldn't help noticing that Mr. Weasley's ears had gone red, just like Ron's did when he was under pressure. "Good job, too," said Mr. Weasley briskly. "Do you realize how much luggage you've all got in between you? A nice set you'd be in the Muggle Underground. You're all packed, aren't you?" "Ron hasn't put all his new things in his trunk yet," said Percy in a long-suffering voice. "He's dumped them on my bed. You better go and pack properly, Ron, because we won't have much time in the morning." Mrs. Weasley called down the table. Ron scowled at Percy. After dinner, everyone felt very full and sleepy. One by one, they made their way upstairs to their rooms to check their things for the next day. Ron and Percy were next door to Harry. He had just closed and locked his own trunk where he heard angry voices through the wall and went on to see what was going on. The door of number 12 was ajar, and Percy was shouting, "It was here, on the bedside table. I took it off for polishing." "I haven't touched it, all right," Ron roared back. "What's up?" said Harry. "My head boy Paige had a gun," said Percy, frowning on Harry. "So Scabbers Red Tonic," said Ron, throwing his things out to look. "I think I might have left in the bar." "You're not going anywhere till you found my badge," said Percy. "It will get Stabber's scarf. I'm packed," said Harry. Harry was halfway along the passage to the bar, which was now very dark, when he heard another pair of angry voices coming from the parlor. A second later, he recognized them as Mr. and Mrs. Weasley's. He hesitated, not wanting them to know he'd heard them rowing, when the sound of his own name had made him stop, then moved closer to the parlor door. Makes no sense not to tell him, Mr. Weasley was saying heatedly. Harry's got a right to know. I tried to tell Fudge, but he insisted on Harry like a child. He's 13 years old, and Arthur, the truth won't terrify him, Mrs. Weasley said shrilly. Do you really want to send Harry back to school with that hanging over him? For heaven's sake, he's happy not knowing. I don't want to make him miserable. I want to put him on his guard, reported Mr. Weasley. You know what Harry and Ron are like, wandering off by themselves. They even ended up in the Forbidden Forest, but Harry mustn't do that this year. I think what could happen on them the night ran away from home. If the night bus hadn't picked him up, I'm prepared to bet he would have been dead before the ministry found him. But he's not dead. He's fine. So what's the point? Molly, they say Sirius Black mad, and maybe he is. But he was clever enough to escape from Azkaban, and that's supposed to be impossible. It's been a month now, and no one's hide nor hair off him. And I don't care what Fudge keeps telling the Daily Prophet. We're not near catching Black than investing self-spelling wands. The only thing we know for sure is that Black's after, but Harry will be perfectly safe at Hogwarts. We thought Azkaban was perfectly safe. If Black can break out of Azkaban, we can break into Hogwarts. But no one really sure that Black after Harry. There's a thud on wood, and Harry was sure Mr. Weasley had banged his fist of the table. Molly, how many times do I have to tell you? They didn't report it in the press because Fudge wanted to keep it quiet, but Fudge went out to Azkaban the night Black escaped. The guards told Fudge that Black's been talking in his sleep for a while now. Always the same words. He's at Hogwarts, he's at Hogwarts. Black is deranged, Molly, and he wants to Harry dead. If you ask me, he thinks murdering Harry will bring you-know-who back to power. Black lost everything in that night Harry stopped you-know-who, and he's let 12 years along in Azkaban to brood on that. There was silence. Harry leaned still closer to the door, desperate to hear more. Well, Arthur, you must do what you think is right, but you're forgetting Albus Dumbledore. I don't think anything could hurt Harry at Hogwarts while Dumbledore's headmaster. I suppose he knows about all this? Of course he knows. We had to ask him if he minds the Azkaban guards stationing themselves around the entrance to the school grounds. He wasn't happy about it, but he agreed. Not happy? Why shouldn't he be happy if they were there to catch Black? Dumbledore isn't fond of the Azkaban guards, said Mr. Weasley heavily. Nor am I, when it comes to that. But if you're dealing with a wizard like Black, you sometimes have to join forces with those you'd rather avoid. If they save Harry, then I will never say another word against them, said Mr. Weasley wearily. It's late, Molly, we'd better go up. Harry heard chairs move. As quietly as he could, he hurried down the passage to the bar and out of sight. The parlor door opened, and a few seconds later footsteps told him that Mr. and Mrs. Weasley were climbing the stairs. The bottle of red talking was lying under the table they had sat earlier. Harry waited until he heard Mr. Weasley's bedroom door close when he headed back the upstairs with the bottle. Fred and George were crouching in the shadows on the landing, heaving with laughter as they listened to Percy's dismounting and his bronze room in the research of his badge. Well, you got it, Fred whispered to Harry. We've been improving it. The badge now read, Big Head Boy. Harry forced a laugh, went to give Ron the red tonic, then shut himself in his room and lay down on his bed. So Sirius Black was after him. That explained everything. Fudge had been letting in with him because he was so relieved to find him alive. He had made Harry promise to stay in Diagon Alley, where there were plenty of wizards to keep an eye on him. And he was sending 2 mystery cars to take them all to the station tomorrow, so that the Weasleys could look after Harry until he was on the train. Harry listened to the muffled shouting next door and wondered why he didn't feel more scared. Sirius Black had murdered 13 people with one curse. Mr. and Mrs. Weasley obviously thought Harry would be panic-stricken if he knew the truth, but Harry happened to agree wholeheartedly with Mrs. Weasley that the safest place on Earth was wherever Albus Dumbledore happened to be. Didn't people always say that Dumbledore was the only person Lord Voldemort had ever been afraid of? Surely Black, as Voldemort's right-hand man, would be just as frightened of him. And then there were these Azkaban guards everyone kept talking about. They seemed to scare most people senseless, and if they were stationed all around the school, Black's chances of getting inside seemed very remote. No, all in all, the thing that bothered Harry was most the fact that his chances of visiting Hogsmeade now looked like 0. Nobody would want Harry to leave the safety of the castle until Black was caught. In fact, Harry suspected every movement would carefully watched until the danger had passed. He scowled at the dark ceiling. Did they think he couldn't look after himself? He had escaped Lord Voldemort 3 times. He wasn't completely useless. Unbidden, the image of the beast and the shadows of Magnolia Crescent crossed his mind. What to do when you know the worst is coming? I'm not going to be murdered, Harry said out loud. That's the spirit, dear, said his mirror sleepily.